Welcome back, everyone. In the first part of lecture on children and grief, we were looking in a more general sense, looking at some of their common needs and experiences. This part of lecture now brings us to our discussion of how development influences the way a child or teen understands death. Do you think it makes a difference? Why? What examples come to mind? Take a minute and think to yourself about how a toddler or preschooler might be different from a child in elementary school, or then middle or high school for that matter. What's happening and changing developmentally, not just physically, but cognitively and emotionally as well? How might this then impact the ways that they react to change and loss? Think about feelings and behaviors. What might you expect to see or be surprised to see? We'll talk about these things in this next part of lecture, as the goal is that if we better understand where kids are coming from, we'll be better prepared to adjust our interactions with them. We can talk about what to say, how to act, and so forth, so that we're comforting them and providing them with the appropriate information. Let's get started. Children look at death differently depending upon how old they are and how emotionally and intellectually mature they are. The concepts listed on this slide are very important for you to know and understand, as they will help you recognize where a child is at in their development as it comes to understanding death. Let's go through each one briefly. Progressive just means that the older kids get, the more they will understand about death and its many impacts. Young children obviously won't understand quite as much as older children or teens, but that doesn't mean that we need to leave them out of the picture altogether. In fact, when kids have no information, they tend to make up scenarios in their minds that are even worse than what really happened. They pick up on comments made by adults or older siblings, and they may weave together a far different image in their mind. Because of this, we need to have a better idea of what they really do know, and then go from there. Universality. This means that children begin to understand that death is universal, that everyone and everything will die at some point in its life. Sometimes children have been introduced to this concept earlier in life, but others don't realize it until they experience a significant death, and then they may become afraid that others they love are also going to die. Rather than lying to them and promising them that you're not going to die or their parent isn't going to die, it's far better to say something like this. At some point, everyone and everything dies. Most people don't die until they're old, but sometimes accidents happen or people get sick even when they're not old. What I can promise is to be the best blank, mom, dad, brother, sister, etc., that I can be, and I will take good care of you. Kids who worry about others dying are scared of being all alone with no one to care for them. So you want to help them feel secure, even in this time of change. Let's look at irreversibility. Somewhere around ages 6 through 9, kids start to understand that death is irreversible. In other words, you can't die and come back to life like we see happening in cartoons, books, movies, and video games. This relates to non-functionality, or helping them understand that the body stops working. It helps to use concrete words when you're describing what it means to die. Say things like this. When you die, your heart stops beating and blood doesn't go to your body anymore. Your lungs won't pump oxygen anymore. When you die, you don't have to go to the bathroom or take a bath again. You don't feel anything, not pain, not hot, not cold. When we die, we cannot come back to life. Of course, depending upon your religious or spiritual beliefs, you may also follow that explanation with some words about going to heaven or joining loved ones who have already died, depending upon what brings you and the child comfort. Just know that that's still pretty abstract and hard for them to understand. We've talked a little about causality earlier. This is where kids are trying to make sense of what caused their loved one to die. Sometimes kids think they caused the death, even if it wasn't really the case. But the older kids get, the more they really get interested in this. One of my favorite ages to work with when I was at Teddy Bear Hollow was the preteen group, the 10 to 12-year-olds. They were old enough to understand more about death, and they were really curious. They'd ask lots of good questions about dying and burials, funerals, obituaries, all kinds of stuff, and they were usually very eager to learn and understand more. They wanted to know more about how the body works and what happens inside it. They became more focused on some of the details and just trying to wrap their heads around it all. Obviously, younger kids have less understanding about causality, while teens and adults have more understanding. They all just conceptualize it differently. Say an elderly woman died of congestive heart failure. Little kids might be okay with an explanation like this. Grandma was sick and her heart didn't work right anymore. Whereas kids a little older might want more explanation and detail. Preteens and teens might want to know more about how the heart couldn't pump as well, or how fluids were building up in different parts of the body, making it even harder for her heart to work. The idea then is to adjust how we talk about and how we explain death, depending upon the age, cognitive level, and emotional maturity of the child or teen that we're working with. One last concept that's important to mention is personal mortality. After significant death, many elementary-age children and older will realize that they too will die at some point in their life. For some, this can be very scary and distressing since they may not have thought about it before. But depending upon how the person died and the type of support that they and their family receive, they may not, and certainly don't have to, have it be very scary after all. Usually kids are afraid of pain and they're worried that it will hurt a lot when they die, which I think is probably common for a lot of adults as well. If those kids have been able to witness or be a part of a death that was serene and peaceful, that will leave a very different death imprint or memory in their mind. So what can we do? How can we start to teach children about death at a young age to help them have a healthy sense of what it means to live and die, and hopefully in a way that doesn't have a really big impact on them? Simply stated, look around you. There are all kinds of opportunities for us to introduce children to a natural death. I've listed some examples of those opportunities here on the slide. Maybe there's a new baby in the family, and you teach them about the beauty of new living things. Maybe you point out the cycle of the seasons, so they understand that plants grow in the spring, flourish in the summer, and then may die in the fall or early winter. Maybe you have a family pet, and they're able to experience that death and how people handle it. Maybe they see a dead animal along the side of the road, or dead insects in their backyard. Maybe an elderly neighbor dies, or someone else they know dies, but they aren't really close to that person. These are opportunities for parents and other caring adults to help introduce the concepts of life and death and explain it to children. And the nice thing is that if they're exposed to some of these other things first, they're able to process death in a way that doesn't necessarily have a strong personal attachment to them. This provides them with a chance to practice these rituals and see what all is involved. As we begin to look at specific developmental stages about grief, it's important to note a few things. First, we're going to be looking at this through Erik Erikson's psychosocial theory of development and incorporating Dr. Earl Groman's model, which requires us to recognize that children are going to re-grieve significant losses at each developmental stage. For example, say a child experiences the death of their father at age 4. They're obviously grieving at that age when it happens, but as they grow up, they're going to look at that death in a different way, and they need to be able to process their thoughts and emotions about it. When they're a few years older and they realize that death is permanent and forever, they're going to have to process that. When they're a teenager and dad isn't there to teach them how to drive or be at their graduation, they're going to have to deal with that. When they get married and dad isn't there to say how proud he is or to walk them down the aisle, they're going to have to re-grieve his death again. It doesn't mean they're going to fall apart all over again necessarily, but for many kids, it's a lot harder for them than they thought it would be. Or shall I say that for many parents or other caregivers thought it would be, they might just not know what's happening. They may think the child is just acting out or doing bad things for attention, when in reality, it's just that child trying to make sense of that death and the impact it had on their life all over again. This can be hard for kids and frustrating for adults, but it's an essential and normal part of life. Just because someone dies when you're young, it doesn't mean you just forget about them and move on. Of course not. You're going to try to process that loss and maintain some type of connection to that person for the rest of your life, even after they die. Keep in mind that for children, they don't always have words to find those complex feelings inside of them. Even for us, when our emotions are really a mess, what do? We act it out, we talk it out. We have the freedom to have a meltdown and walk away. Kids aren't able to do all of that, so oftentimes they implode or explode. Our goal is externalization of feelings to keep them healthy and feel connected. We might have to provide them the means to do this. Maybe demonstrate how you feel by drawing a picture, or let's dance out our emotions. Maybe we have them participate in an activity where they're playing out their grief. I've always felt a person's behavior is a language of its own. Their body is trying to tell me something, and I need to pay attention so I don't miss the messages that it's sending. We tend to immediately discipline a child who bites or kicks or hits, and while the behavior is not okay, we do need to get to the emotion underneath and help them name it, and then channel their action to something safe, but also praise them that they're trying to get it out and communicate it to someone. As we go through Erikson's stages of development, be thinking about some of Earl Groman's key points when talking about death. He reiterates the importance of factoring in that developmental level, especially when looking at things like differentiating between reality and fantasy, looking at magical thinking, and this idea that death is reversible or you can come back to life. These are especially relevant when working with young children. Let's learn more. We'll begin with the youngest children and progress up through teens. So when you think about a baby or a toddler who has just experienced a loss in the family, they're not able to cognitively understand death in ways that we can measure. However, just because they can't process it and talk about it doesn't mean they're not affected. They most certainly react to the emotions of others and the change in their routine, schedule, and environment, as well as being impacted by the loss of physical and loving presence by their parents or main caregivers. On this slide, we see some very specific examples of how they understand death, some of their common behaviors, as well as ideas for what we can say or do. We won't go over every single one, but let's look at a couple. Let's start with behaviors. If there's a significant change or a permanent change like a significant death, we may be seeing them becoming more fussy or more clingy. They can sense the tension and emotions in people around them, either by their tone of voice or even physically sense the difference when they're being held, fed, changed, or so forth. It's important to try to keep that baby or toddler's routine as much as possible. Remember, they're forming attachments and bonds, and so you want to provide physical touch and affection. Talk with them, play with them. Make sure the adults have someone to talk to process their grief, so it doesn't all get taken out on the kids at home. For preschoolers, death is still seen as reversible and temporary. They still have this idea that the person will return. We see here how they conceptualize or understand death, and some of the common thought processes they might have. They tend to have a lot of questions about where the person goes when they die, and if they can go there too. It's not uncommon for preschoolers to say that they want to die and go to heaven to be with mommy or grandpa or whomever. It doesn't mean they're suicidal or depressed. They just don't understand it yet, and of course they want to be with that special person. They also have this sense of magical thinking, where they think they're responsible for things happening, or that they're able to control what's happened. This is normal for this age group. In terms of behaviors, we may see a wide variety of responses to the death. Some kids become shy and withdrawn. Others act out. and still others act like nothing ever happened. This is an unpredictable time for them, and they will demonstrate unpredictable responses. That's okay. They may talk about it all the time, or they may avoid bringing it up at all. They may regress and suddenly struggle with potty training again, or want to have a pacifier once more, or to be held and talked to like a baby. This is normal. They're unconsciously going back to a period in time where their world felt safe and secure, to what it was like before that person died. Sometimes we have to help parents understand this. The kids aren't regressing on purpose, and they're certainly not trying to be naughty. They're just trying to feel safe again. So what can we do? Well, we could use the right terms, such as died instead of went to sleep, or lost, or passed away. Remember, preschoolers are very concrete, and they will then literally assume whatever you say. They may start looking for that dead person who you said was lost, or they fear going to sleep at night because they think that they'll die too. Explain their illness in a way that makes sense to a young child. Maybe their mommy died of pancreatic cancer. They don't know what that means, so generalize it and provide a disclaimer. You could say, Mommy was very, very, very sick in her tummy. It's not like when you get a tummy ache or the flu. Mommy had a sickness in her tummy that no one could fix, even though the doctors tried their very best. Another thing that we can do is allow them to play or act out their grief. This could be through structured activities or games, or it could be more creative, independent play. Like I said earlier, maybe they can dance out how they feel, or they can color or draw how they feel. One of my favorite and most powerful activities that we did at Teddy Bear Hollow with our little ones group involved letting them play funeral. We had 2 boxes with sand in them, and it allowed 2 kids at a time to act out the funeral. If they went, then what did they see happening, or what would they do differently? If they didn't go to the funeral, then what do they think happened? We had miniature trees, flowers, gravestones, caskets, even little play people. I know it sounds weird to some, but they got a chance to demonstrate their understanding. This was so valuable, as it then gave the group facilitators a chance to listen, observe, offer support, and sometimes even explain things in a way that was more accurate or not so scary to the child. It was amazing. Remember, preschoolers are naturally very egocentric. They believe that everything is either about them or revolves around them. Now consider the concept of death, such as if they have a parent die. If that event is about them or revolves around them, think of who they put the blame on. As I mentioned earlier, young children may have confusion about where the deceased person goes after they die. Are they living underground? Where is heaven? Remember that this age is very concrete, and religion and many explanations of death are very abstract. Imagine trying to explain your religious or post-death beliefs to someone in this age group. How would you do it? We need to know or even expect that child will storytell what happened over and over, sometimes in seemingly crude or cruel ways. They're gaining understanding and control when they're able to retell the story of what happened. But imagine if you're the bereaved family member and your child is asking about it for the 20th time today, and every time you explain it, you revisit that acute pain. We have to prepare families for this. We don't want the child to be disciplined or ashamed for what's a very normal, developmentally healthy expression of grappling with this confusing information. If the death is impending or just occurred, explain to the child what they will see and hear. How many people will be coming? Talk about the range of emotions they might see people displaying. This helps to prepare them for any changes in the household, for the funeral, or for things that may be different now. We also need to address and provide reassurance regarding their security needs, providing information such as who will take care of you, who will fix you breakfast, who will tuck you in at night. What if others die too? We've already given some examples, but there's no guidebook for exactly what to say or do in every circumstance. Instead, Earl Grolman reminds us, your answers should correspond to the developmental age of the youngsters, the nature of the death, and their emotional involvement with it. Looking at those things will help us, or their parents, come up with the appropriate type of response or explanation for that particular situation. If we look at school agers, usually between the ages of 5 and 9, death is seen as possible for others, but not for themselves. But by the time they're 9 or 11, they realize that they too could die. Somewhere in this stage, they begin to understand that death is final, and everyone will die at some point in their lifetime. They're able to differentiate between what is alive and what is dead, and especially as they enter those preteen years, they become much more interested in the details and biology and physiology of what of what happens when someone dies. Having a little better understanding doesn't mean they don't still exhibit behaviors, however, as they're still learning how to cope with all the information and the accompanying feelings and thoughts and fears. We may see some regression here at this age too. Like suddenly they can't put themselves to bed at night anymore, or they don't want to do simple things like get dressed on their own or brush their own teeth. Maybe they have separation anxiety and don't want mom or dad or whomever to be out of sight. They may also have physical symptoms like headaches, stomach aches, or want to stay home from school. It can be really hard for parents to know the difference between when their child is actually sick with some type of virus or illness, or if they're just experiencing a physical grief response. We might also see changes in their interactions with peers or in their school performance. So what can you do? What can you say to try to help? You'll see some similarities with what we recommended for the preschoolers. For example, it's always important to try to maintain some type of structure or routine. There's often a lot of chaos and changes that are leading up to, during, or even after a death, so kids feel much more safe and secure when they know what's happening. Provide age-appropriate explanations so they know what's going on and what may be coming up. Let them know that it's okay to feel how they feel and to normalize those emotions so they realize that they're not the only person feeling that way. Give them permission to be sad, angry, lonely, frustrated, and even happy. Sometimes we overlook that, and we're so busy expecting children to always be sad or upset that we forget to let them know that we still want them to be happy. I've seen so many children suppress their laughter and their joy for fear of their parent thinking they don't care or they aren't sad. Try to involve the child in the funeral. We know that every culture and family is different, but remember how we talked about that it wasn't very long ago that children were involved in all parts of the dying and funeral process. Then we removed them, and death became more sterile, more removed. And in the meantime, children began to get overlooked. Children often want to be involved in funeral preparations, such as picking out clothes, writing the person a letter, or drawing them a picture that can be placed in their casket or urn, picking out photos for a personal display at the memorial service, all kinds of things. You can help parents realize this is okay and help them communicate with their children about if and how they might like to be involved. The kids don't have to, of course, but it's always nice to have that option. I mean, think about it. Kids get bossed around all the time anyway, so giving them a little say and control during this difficult time can really be very meaningful and empowering. Kids can't handle really intense emotions for a long period of time, so you're going to see them going back and forth in between happy and sad or playful and angry all day long. That's normal. It's what the grief world refers to as puddle jumping. They can jump in that puddle of grief and be sad and messy for a while, but at some point they've got to jump back out because it's just too intense to sustain for very long. In other words, they jump in and out of their grief. I always found that to be a nice visual, and it's one that really relates to all age and developmental levels. So, to bring it back to something we can do, if we know kids are going to jump in and out of their grief, We want to be able to not only give them permission to do so, but also teach them some coping skills. Let's show them ways they can express their emotions in a safe, healthy way. Talk with them about how they feel and any behaviors they're having. They probably can't make sense of it either, and they're likely feeling very overwhelmed. So just having someone to talk with and listen can go a long way. Adolescents or teenagers are kind of stuck in this in-between place. They're not young children anymore, but they don't yet have all the experience and understanding that adults do. They want to be independent and treated like adults, and yet they're still developing their own coping skills and resources. Depending upon the intellectual and emotional maturity, some teens cope better than others. Some are able to understand and think abstractly, while others are still developing this part of their brain and their social interactions. Many begin to realize that life isn't fair, and that makes them angry. They might look for ways to get back at that person or retaliate. And sometimes, but certainly not all times, teens might have suicidal ideations. Some just aren't equipped with the tools or coping skills to handle the death, and they may really struggle. Peers are so important to this age group. And for this reason, groups can actually be very helpful for grieving teens. It helps them realize they're not the only person on the planet who's experiencing this, and somebody else actually gets it. That's huge for teenagers because in their eyes, the world revolves around them. We might see any variety of emotions and behaviors. Some suddenly act like angels and try to be perfect to make things easier for their family. Some suddenly act out and get into lots of trouble or have difficulty in school or with peers. They may feel like the death is all they can think about, and it can become overwhelming. Or they may work so hard to avoid thinking about the death that they become exhausted just trying to focus on everything else. Some may exhibit risk-taking behaviors such as reckless driving, using alcohol or drugs, increased sexual activity, and so forth. Finding them support, either from a parent or other responsible adult, is really important for their healing and their ongoing adjustment. They're looking at what's modeled at home, and sometimes that's great, but other times the parents aren't doing any better than the kids, and then the whole family is left hurting and really struggling. With teens, there are many things we can say or do. For starters, continue with similar interventions of the previous ages. Just adapt them for older thinking. We don't change the kids' thoughts. We're looking to give them tools to cope with. We give them information and options. We need to realize that anger is a secondary emotion. Try to find what's under it. Maybe it's frustration or helplessness. When we try to take away the grief and pain, we're meeting our needs, not theirs. Give them permission to feel how they feel and express it in a way that's individual to them, so long as they don't hurt themselves or others. This age group is in a self-exploration of their values, their beliefs about life and death, of religion, the role of God, lots of those other big complex thoughts. And death can shake this stage. Let them know that it's okay and provide them with opportunities to talk about it and work through these things. A close death can change their view of the world from what was a safe, fair, trustworthy place to a place that challenges all these concepts they've ever known. Acknowledge that insecurity and fear, even at a time where they're trying to appear grown up or tough. As with younger children, teens look to their parents for a guide on how to grieve. Understand that teens perceive support as being there for them. Find someone who they can trust and can be that consistent confidant when they need them. This is the table that I developed when I was at Teddy Bear Hollow. I think it's a nice summary of what we've been talking about in this lecture. It obviously can't include everything, but I tried to hit the main highlights of each developmental age group, what some of their common grief reactions might be, and some specific suggestions for ways to offer support. I hope you find it helpful. It's also nice because I know many of you are interested in working in hospice, in hospitals, or even nursing homes. So print off a copy of this table and take it to work with you. It'll help you better understand and thus better offer support to your patients and their families. Sometimes that even means their grandchildren. So, as we wrap up this part of the lecture, let's remember 3 important factors. First, children grieve differently than adults, and as such, we cannot expect them to understand death in the same ways. We can't expect them to use the same words or even demonstrate the same types of behaviors. They're still learning and developing their coping skills. Second, kids grieve differently based on their age and developmental level. That should be pretty clear by now, and I've provided a lot of information here for you. Even so, remember that these are just general guidelines. Just because someone has a birthday and turns a year older, it doesn't automatically mean they suddenly understand more or have a different take on things. You may have some kids a little younger who understand more, or some teens who understand a bit less than their peers. That's normal too, and you'll need to adjust your approach to that unique individual, not just generalizations about that whole age group. Finally, children will re-grieve the loss at every developmental stage. That death doesn't go away. They need to process that loss at many points over their lifespan, and they need to know that it's normal, and then have the support and opportunities to do so.